Story 1. They say a good photo can capture a moment forever. I didn't realize until that night how fucking literal that could be. I was deep in the woods of Cascade Valley, hiking trails that had probably seen more deer than humans in the past decade. My camera, a clunky old Nikon I'd picked up at a pawn shop, was slung around my neck, bouncing against my chest with every step. I'd been scouting locations for my portfolio, hoping to find something raw and untouched. Nature's scars, I called it. Abandoned barns, rusted out cars, forgotten places. There's beauty in decay, you know? It speaks to me. I'd been walking for hours when I saw it. A hunting cabin, half buried in the undergrowth. The roof sagged in the middle, and the wood was blackened and warped like it had been through a fire and barely survived. But it had character, the kind of fucked up, haunted vibe that screamed, "Take my picture." The door was hanging off its hinges. I stepped inside, boots crunching on shattered glass and bits of debris. The air smelled like damp wood and something metallic, like old blood. The light coming through the cracked windows cast jagged shadows on the walls. Perfect. I started snapping shots, close-ups of the broken furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the strange stains on the floorboards. Every creak of the cabin settling made my nerves buzz, but I told myself it was just the wind. It wasn't until I looked at the wall above the fireplace that I saw them. Black and white photographs, dozens of them, pinned up in neat rows. They were portraits, men and women, all staring dead into the camera. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes, fuck man, their eyes told stories, fear, desperation, like they'd been caught in their final moments. I raised my camera to get a shot of the display, but my hands were shaking now. One of the photos caught my attention. A guy, early 30s maybe, with a beard and a baseball cap. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. That's when I noticed the dates scribbled beneath the photos. The guys had a date from last year. My stomach twisted. Nice shot, isn't it? I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my camera. There was a man standing in the doorway, tall, broad shoulders, wearing a camo jacket and muddy boots. His face was weathered, like leather left out in the sun too long. He had a rifle slung over one shoulder and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry, I didn't know this place was, yours," I stammered. "I'll just..." "Relax," he said, stepping inside. The floor groaned under his weight. "I don't mind company. Not many folks come out this way." His boots left muddy prints on the floor as he moved closer. He looked at my camera, and then at the wall of photos. "You like taking pictures?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "It's kind of my thing." He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning me like he was sizing me up. "Pictures tell the truth, you know? More than people do. They don't lie." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. My palms were sweating, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. The guy walked over to the wall of photos and ran a finger across one of the frames, smudging the glass. "Hey. Each of these folks came through here just like you," he said, his voice low and even. "Had their own reasons. Chasing something. Looking for something. What are you looking for?" "I just take pictures," I said. "That's all." "That's all?" he repeated, his smile stretching wider. "Well, that's all they were doing too. Funny how that works out." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced at the door, calculating how fast I could get past him if I had to run. "I should go," I said, taking a step back. Thanks for letting me look around. You haven't seen the best part, he said, blocking my path. No, really, Let me show you, he said, his voice harder now. He unslung the rifle and leaned it against the wall, like a casual threat. My heart was in my fucking throat. He gestured for me to follow him to a door at the back of the cabin. Every instinct in my body screamed to bolt, but my legs felt like concrete. He opened the door, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Go ahead, he said, motioning for me to descend. I think I'll pass, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head, that fake-ass smile fading. Wasn't a suggestion. I hesitated for half a second too long, and he took a step closer, his hand resting on the rifle. Fuck. I swallowed hard and started down the stairs, each step creaking like it might give out under me. The basement smelled worse than the upstairs. Damp and rotten, with a sour undertone that turned my stomach. The walls were lined with more photos, these ones even more fucked up. People in various states of I don't even know how to describe it. Pain, fear, death. Some of them looked like they were screaming. Others were so still they could have been mannequins. This is my gallery, he said from behind me. My little piece of the truth. I turned to face him, my back pressed against the wall. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. You're a photographer. Thought you'd appreciate the art. This isn't art, I said, my voice cracking. This is fucking sick. His expression darkened, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. Beneath the calm, friendly exterior was something colder, meaner. You don't get it, he said. But you will. He lunged at me, and I barely ducked in time. My camera swung wildly, smashing against the wall. I bolted for the stairs, adrenaline pumping like jet fuel. He was right behind me, his boots thundering on the steps. I hit the ground floor and made a beeline for the door, yanking it open and sprinting into the woods. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the road, where my car was parked. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I floored it, not looking back. I don't know how long I drove before I pulled over, my chest heaving, my mind racing. My camera was still around my neck, the lens cracked, but the memory card intact. I've looked at the photos since then, but I can't bring myself to delete them. There's one shot I keep coming back to, the guy in the baseball cap, staring into the lens like he's looking right at me, and below it, the date scribbled in ink, tomorrow's date. I don't know how he did it, but I'm not waiting around to find out. This time, I'm the one disappearing. Story 2. You ever feel like your job is just a slow death in a fluorescent cage? That's what nursing feels like sometimes. You think you're signing up to help people, to make a difference. Instead, it's endless paperwork, shitty coffee, and patients who either hate you, need you too much, or stare through you like you're already a ghost. It was the same routine every night. Badge swipe, scrubs on, quick pep talk in the mirror. Don't fuck it up today, Sam. Keep your head down. Get through the shift. I'd seen it all during my years on the psych ward. The screamers, the silent ones, the ones who made you look over your shoulder on your way to the car. But none of them stuck with me like patient 431, Thomas Graves. He came in on a Wednesday night, dragged in by 2 EMTs who looked like they'd seen the devil himself. No family, no ID, just a man in his late 40s with hollow eyes, and a face so gaunt it looked like it had been carved out of stone. His clothes were soaked with blood, not his, we later found out. But he didn't resist when we strapped him to the gurney. He just kept clutching a leather-bound journal, like it was a goddamn lifeline. They handed me his file the next morning. Thin. Barely any notes except for the basics. Male, 47, no known medical history, found wandering the side of the highway mumbling incoherently. He hadn't said a word since he got here, just sat in his room, staring at the journal, scribbling in it with the kind of manic focus that made my skin crawl. At first, I figured he was just another lost soul, another casualty of whatever cruel god pulls the strings in this world. But then the poems started. The first one showed up on my desk. No explanation. Just a single torn page, folded neatly under my coffee cup. The mirror cracks. Its shards are teeth. It smiles wide. It waits beneath. I thought it was a prank at first. Hell, some of the nurses here have a dark sense of humor, and I wasn't above screwing with coworkers when the nights got long. But when I asked around, no one owned up to it. And that was just the beginning. Every shift, a new page, always in the same jagged handwriting, always more unsettling than the last. The second poem came 3 days later. The shadow bends, the door won't close, the blood runs thin, the body knows. By the third one, I stopped brushing it off. The night will split, the song will die. Your name, a thread, unraveling why. It wasn't just the words, it was the feeling that came with them. Like the air got heavier every time I unfolded one of those pages. Like something was pressing down on me, watching me. And then there were the details. Details about me. Shit no one should have known. Like the fight I had with my sister last week. Or the scar on my left hand from when I was a kid. That's when I started paying attention to Thomas Graves. "Who the fuck are you?" I asked him one night during rounds. He just stared at me, his eyes darting to the journal clutched in his hands. I'd never seen him without it. "You're writing these, aren't you? How do you know these things?" No response. Just that blank, unblinking stare, like he was looking through me. The silence stretched out so long it felt like the walls were closing in. Finally, I snapped. I grabbed the journal. "What's in here? What's so fucking important?" He lunged for me. Fast. Faster than I thought possible for a man who hadn't eaten in days. His hands were around my wrists, his face inches from mine. And for the first time he spoke. "Don't." His voice was a rasp, barely above a whisper. "It's not mine. It's not yours." I yanked free, my pulse hammering in my ears. The journal slipped from his hands, falling open on the floor. Pages and pages of poetry spilled out, each one more twisted than the last. I only caught fragments as I scrambled to pick it up. The sky will split, the earth will bleed. The glass will shatter, the thread will snap. She will remember, but you will forget. That night, the nightmares started. I dreamed of the poems, of words scrawling themselves across the walls in blood, of shadows crawling out of mirrors, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. In the dreams, I was always in the hospital, always alone, and I always woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, with the taste of metal in my mouth. But it wasn't just the dreams. Little things started happening during my shifts. My reflection in the windows didn't quite match my movements. Lights flickered when I walked past. And the poems kept coming. Not just on my desk anymore. In my locker, taped to my car windshield, stuffed into my fucking scrubs. Each one was worse than the last. Each one cut deeper. The house of glass. We'll call your name. The walls will crack. The blood. The blame. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to his room, journal in hand, ready to get answers or lose my shit trying. But when I opened the door, he wasn't there. No one could explain how he'd gotten out. The cameras showed nothing. The doors were locked. He was just gone. But the journal? That stayed. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. But back then I was desperate. I needed to know. So I opened it and I read. The poems told a story about a man who tried to run from his past and failed. A man who hurt the people he loved, who drowned his guilt in whiskey and pills. A man who thought he could escape, but the shadows found him anyway. A man who wasn't just a stranger. The man was me. I don't know how he knew. I don't know who or what Thomas Graves was. But the journal didn't lie. The last page wasn't a poem. It was a single sentence, scrawled in red ink. You can't run from yourself forever. I burned it. I thought that would be the end of it. But the poems haven't stopped. They're everywhere now. On scraps of paper in my house, written on the fogged up bathroom mirror, whispered in my fucking dreams. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Every day the shadows creep closer. Every night I hear his voice in my head, whispering the same words. It's not mine. It's not yours. But if it's not his, and it's not mine, whose is it? Story 3. I've been driving for Ritter, the rideshare app, for about 3 years now. It started as a side gig after the divorce, something to keep me busy, keep my mind from spiraling into places it didn't need to go. But now, it's my full-time gig. Between the alimony checks and my kids' school tuition, it barely keeps me afloat, but it's better than nothing. Nights are the worst, though. That's when you pick up the real freaks, the drunks, the coked-up trust fund assholes, the types who think you're their personal therapist. I've seen it all. Or at least I thought I had. It was a Tuesday night. Slow, drizzly, the kind of night where the city looks like it's crying. I was about to call it quits. My gas tank was low, my patience lower. Then a ping came through. A pickup request on the far edge of downtown, near those abandoned warehouses by the docks. Normally I'd skip it. Too much risk, not enough reward. But I'd only made $50 that night, so I figured, fuck it, one more. I pulled up to the curb. No one was there. Just the empty street and the faint sound of water dripping from a gutter. I was about to cancel the ride when he appeared from the shadows, like he'd been watching me the whole time. Tall, thin, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive, but somehow out of place. His face was pale, almost waxy, and his eyes were too fucking calm. Like he wasn't walking toward a stranger's car at night, but strolling into his own living room. He slid into the back seat without a word, just nodded, like we already knew each other. Where to? I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine. They were the kind of eyes that made your skin itch, like you'd been caught doing something you shouldn't. Just drive, he said. Normally I'd tell a passenger like that to fuck off, but something about him, I don't know. Maybe it was the way he said it. Calm, but firm, like there wasn't room for debate. Or maybe it was the way he smiled, just barely, like he knew I wouldn't say no. So I drove. At first he didn't say much, just sat there staring out the window as the city slid past in a blur of neon and rain. I thought about making small talk, the usual bullshit. Busy night? Or weather's shit, huh? but something told me to keep my mouth shut. The air in the car felt tight, like it would snap if I said the wrong thing. About 10 minutes in, he spoke. "You're a good driver," he said. His voice was smooth, almost soothing, but there was something underneath it. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Thanks," I said. "Been doing this a while." "I know," he said, still staring out the window. "I've seen you before." That stopped me. "Seen me? Where?" He didn't answer right away, just tapped his fingers on his knee like he was thinking. "Here and there," he said finally. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" My hands tightened on the wheel. What's that supposed to mean? "Just an observation," he said, smiling that faint, unreadable smile. "Divorce, money troubles, you're doing your best, but it's never quite enough, is it?" I felt my stomach twist. "Look, man, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but—" "Relax," he said, cutting me off. "I'm just making conversation." But it didn't feel like conversation. It felt like he was peeling me open, layer by layer, exposing shit I didn't want to think about, let alone talk about with some stranger in my back seat. The rain got heavier as we drove. The wipers squealed across the windshield, barely keeping up. I realized I didn't even know where we were anymore. He'd been giving me vague directions. "Turn left here. Take the next right," leading me deeper into parts of the city I didn't recognize. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Almost there," he said. "Yeah, but where is there?" He leaned forward then, just enough that I could see his face in the rearview mirror. "Home," he said. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "Look, man, if you don't give me an address, I'm ending the ride." He didn't reply, just sat back, silent, like he hadn't even heard me. I reached for my phone to cancel the trip, but before I could, he spoke again. "Do you remember her?" I froze. "What?" "The girl from the diner," he said. 4 years ago. Black hair, red jacket. You spilled coffee on her by accident." My mouth went dry. I hadn't thought about her in years. She was just some random girl I'd met when I was waiting tables. I'd bumped into her, spilled coffee on her jacket, and she'd laughed it off like it was no big deal. We'd chatted a bit, but nothing came of it. Just another fleeting moment in a life full of them. "How the fuck do you know about that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He smiled again, wider this time. "I know a lot of things about you." I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop in the middle of an empty street. "Get the fuck out of my car," I said, turning to face him. But he didn't move, didn't even flinch. "Are you sure you want me to leave?" he asked. "We're so close now." "Close to what?" I shouted. "Who the fuck are you?" He leaned forward again, his face inches from mine. His eyes... Jesus Christ, his eyes were like black holes, swallowing everything in their path. "I'm someone you should have remembered," he said. "Someone you should have cared about." And then it hit me. The girl from the diner. She'd mentioned her brother that day. Said he was having a hard time. I'd barely listened. Too caught up in my own shit. It was him. It had to be. "Look, I don't know what you think I did, but you forgot," he said, his voice rising for the first time. "You fucking forgot her. She's gone, and you don't even remember her name." I stared at him, my mind racing. I didn't... "You didn't care," he said, leaning back with a bitter laugh. "And now, neither do I." Before I could react, He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. I sat there, frozen, watching him walk away until he disappeared into the shadows. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was dread, like he wasn't gone, like he was still there, watching, waiting for the moment when I'd least expect him to come back. And the worst part, he was right. I didn't remember her name. Thanks for joining me tonight on Mr. Fright Nights. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Your support keeps the lights on, because who knows what's waiting in the dark. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes open. You never know who might be watching.